In this next practice, we are going to write a GUI to allow the user to enter in a series of numbers, integer numbers, and then when they hit a calculate button, we'll display to them the total, min, and max, and average of all the numbers they've entered in. We'll also let them clear their list and start over. So again, I recommend you pause this video, try this practice on your own, and then come back and take a look at the solution together. So let's first start about thinking what components we'll need. So we'll need a way for users to enter in numbers, so that'll most likely be a text field. We'll probably want to give users some instructions, that'll be a label. We'll need a calculate button, and then we'll need some way to display total, min, max, and average. So we could do that with a label, we could do that with a text field. So you can actually use text fields just for output of information. You would just set them to be non-editable. So it would be up to you. And then of course a clear button as well. So I'm going to, create, a new class here. I'll call it number fun. Just like I've been doing, I'm going to start with my template code. Go through first and make all the changes. Hopefully after a couple times of using the template, it becomes pretty second nature to you. Just keep it white background this time. Come back and add all my components. I do know I'm going to need at least a listener for one or more buttons. Perhaps some text field. I'll have to think about that. Number fun frame gets a new number fun. Okay, so all of my compiler errors go away, and that's what my frame looks like for right now. Okay, so let's now create our component. So again, we said we're going to have some instructions, which I probably could just declare as local variable to the constructor, but either way works. We're going to have a text field, call it the input field. We're going to have a button, calculate button, as well as a clear button. And then I need some more labels too, right? I need the total label, the max label, the min label, and the average label. Now I also need some way to keep track of the numbers that the user is entering in, right? So to do that, I will use an array list. Okay, of course I need to import that from the java.util package. Okay, so let's create all of those components. Okay, so we'll start with our instructions label. Enter numbers one at a time. Add that to the pane. Of course, you could change the font if you want to. Oops. Sorry, I should say add it to the panel. Okay, then I'll have my text field. Add that to the panel. I'm not going to add a listener. I'm going to use, again, the buttons for my listener. Actually, that's not true. I am going to use a listener this time because the buttons trigger when we want to calculate something about the whole list, but we want, whenever the user presses enter, that's when we want to add a new number to the list. So I am going to register a listener to my input field. And I'm just going to use, actually I'm going to change this so it's not button listener. I'm going to call this number listener, and then I can use it for all my components. Again, you have the option of creating multiple classes, multiple listener classes for different components, but I usually tend to create one listener class and then just internally decide where the source of the action is. Okay, then I'll get my calculate button. add it to the panel, add a listener, and then I've got my clear button. Add it to the panel, add a listener, and then of course I've got all my stats labels. So I've got the total label, add that. Of course, again, labels don't interact with the user, so they don't need a listener. My min label, my max label, and my average label. Okay, so I'm going to run this program to make sure it looks good before I even think about adding in the code we need. Okay, so you could probably want to make that a little bigger. I'm going to make that a little wider, make my text field a little wider. Again, we're going to deal with using layout managers to make your programs look a little better, not in this video, but in the future. Okay, so we're just going to leave this like, well, maybe that would look pretty nice like that. That's a little better. Okay, so let's make this a little wider. I won't play around with it too much on here, but there we go. Okay. Now, of course, I have one last thing I forgot to do, which was initialize my number list. I have to hold integers. Okay, so we're going to start off with an empty list. Okay, so now we need to figure out what happens. Well, there's sort of three sources of events that we have to deal with. Did I forget something down here? No. What am I getting that error from? Can't see it. It goes away too fast before I can see it. Maybe it's just because I had that other program open still. Okay. There we go. Okay. So there's a couple different sources of events I need to handle. I need to handle when the user types in a number and clicks enter. So that means the source of the event would be the text field. I need to handle when the user clicks calculate stats, as well as when they click clear the list. So there's going to be three possible sources of the event. So if the event.getSource is the input field, I'm going to do one thing. Otherwise, if the event.getSource is the calculate button, I'm going to do something else. And otherwise, if the event.getSource is the clear button, I'm going to do something else. Okay, so in this way I can use a single listener and just check what the source of the event was before I take my action. So if the source of the event was the input field, what I need to do is I need to get the user's number. And again, I do that by parsing the string from the input field. Now, again, I'm not doing any error checking to make sure there's actually a value there or to make sure that value is a number. You can use the approach we took on the previous video to account for the field being empty, and then eventually we'll learn how to use exception handling to deal with the user typing in non-numeric input. So I get the user number, and then I need to add it to the list. Okay. So that one's pretty easy. The clear button is also pretty easy. All I need to do is clear out the list. Okay. Then what we want to do with it calculate? Well, I want to figure out the total, the min, the max, and the average. So that's a lot of stuff to do inside of this conditional inside of my listener class. So I'm probably going to have a helper method, calculate stats. Okay, and here I can now go through and calculate everything. So for example, I'll have a total and I'll go through my list. updating my total. Then I need to get the min and the max and the average. Let's start with the average since we just did the total. Well, we know the average is going to be the total divided by the number list.size. But is this going to give me the correct answer? Potentially not, because total is an int, number list.size is an int, and remember we always execute the right, or evaluate rather, the right hand side of an equal sign first before assigning it to the value on the left. So this is actually going to evaluate integer division. So we might truncate, we might lose our decimal portion of our total. So I'm sorry, of our average. So we need to either cast one of these two operands to a double, or we can multiply either one of them by 1.0 to convert it to a double. So that'll now give us our correct average. Now for the min and the max, there's a couple different ways we could do it. We could write a method to calculate the min or the max. I am going to suggest that you pause the video, write a max or min method yourself. Finding the min or the max of a list is something you should absolutely know how to do in writing your own method to do it. So do that. Again, I encourage you to share your solution to that on the forums or to post questions about that part on the forums. But I'm going to show you a nice little shortcut here to find the min. And you can use the collections.min where you send in the number list. So collections is a class in Java that has all sorts of static helper methods, utility methods that you can apply to things like lists. For example, you can find the minimum or the maximum. So this is a great thing to do, to find the min or the max, but again, you should most certainly know how to write a method to manually find the minimum and manually find the maximum. So make sure that you know how to do that. Once you know how to do that, it's okay to use these utilities as a nice shortcut, but again, you should know how to do that in terms of moving forward for your own knowledge. Now, of course, I have to update all of my labels, so I have to say my total label. Let's set the text to be total plus the total. Just gonna do a little copy paste here. I have to set my min label, my max label, and my average label. So I have to update all the displays. Okay. Okay. So that'll happen there. All right, so let's give this a try. So I'll enter 1, enter 2, enter. Now, I don't know if you can tell this from what I'm clicking, but when I enter 3 and then enter, the text field doesn't get cleared. I have to click backspace to clear it. So that's kind of annoying. I probably want to fix that from a user perspective. But for now, I've just entered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can calculate the stats. There's my min, my max, my average, my total. Okay, I can clear the list and start over, and I'll enter 1, 1, 2, for example, and I'll get some new stats. Okay, now I probably also want to do some things like if I clear the list, maybe I want to clear out these labels. If I calculate stats with an empty list, I'm going to get an exception because I'm trying to find the average of a list with size 0. So I'm trying to divide by 0. So I probably want to account for that as well. I'll leave those all as modifications for you to make, but I am going to make the one modification where we want to clear out the text field. So what we can do for that is when we get the user's number and add it to our list, we can then update the text of the infield. So we'll say input field.text to just the empty string. And now when I put in a number, it clears it for me, which is kind of nice, much more user-friendly. Calculate my stats. There we go. Okay. So that's that practice. And one more to go here. We're going to write a GUI high-low guessing game where the user enters a number and we tell them, we pick a random number and then they enter a number. We tell them whether they're too high, too low, or correct. And then we can also modify with a play again button. So I'm going to create a new class. Oops, not a new package. Class. GUI high low. Start with my template. I'm going to actually pause this video a minute so you don't have to, I think you're probably getting pretty sick of watching me clean up the template. Okay, so I just went through and cleaned up the code so it compiles. Nothing in here yet though, just the empty window. So what do we need for this program? Well, we probably need to give some instructions to the user. We need a text field for them to enter in their guess. We need a play again button. We need a label to show results, right? Okay, so we need some instructions. We need a text field, input field. We need a label for the results. And we need a guess button. Well, we either need a guess button. It depends if we want the user to click a button to make their guess or enter to enter their, or click enter to enter their guess. So if we want them to click enter, then we don't need a button. If we want them to type in a number and click a button, then we need a button. So again, you might do a different solution than I would. I'm not going to use the button. We're going to just have a play again button. And we'll just have the user click enter to make their guess. Now, we also need some instance data variables of just primitive type, right? We need to keep track of what the number is. So we'll keep track of the target number. Okay. Okay, so those are my instance data variables. So now let's create them all. So my instructions label. Add it to the panel. My input field. Could either put enter your number here, or I could just make it a default size. Add it to the panel. Add a listener. And I'm going to call it my game listener since it's not listening just for buttons. Okay, then I've got my result label. Now my result label, I'm just going to create it with an empty string for now because I don't have a result when the game starts out. Right, this is going to be where we're going to tell the user too low, too high, just right. But I don't have any text there to put there yet, so I'm just going to start out with an empty string. Result label. But I am going to set the font so that when I do have something to put there, it'll be in a font that I want. I happen to be partial to the Helvetica. We'll make it plain this time so you can see what that looks like, and size 18. And of course, I need to what am I missing? New font. You're actually creating a new font object to pass in. And then I add it to my panel. And I'm going to add my clear button or play again button. But I don't want the user to be able to play again right away. I want to wait till they finish the first game to play again. So I'm going to set that button to be initially not enabled. So set enabled false. And then add it. And add my listener. So there's two actions I need to be listening for. I need to be listening for the user clicking enter into the text field or clicking that play again button once it's enabled. So first of all, I'm going to just run my program, make sure everything looks right. I probably need to make my window a little wider. Okay. You'll see that the results label, there's nothing there. It's just, you don't even see it. You don't see a placeholder for it, but it is there, trust me. I'm going to make this a little wider. Okay, so now let's go ahead and write our listener code. So first thing we need to do is get the user's guess by parsing the string. Again, no error checking here. You should at this point at least add error checking for a blank text field, and then eventually we'll use exception handling to handle non-numeric input. But one other thing I forgot, of course, I don't have a random number. I need a target number. So I need to do that inside my constructor. And I'll create my target number. Now, if I want the user to guess between 1 and 100, that's 100 options. So I want to pick between 100 random numbers. But of course, that would return to me a random number between 0 and 99. So I need to shift that whole range up by 1. And I probably should also tell my user that. Okay, so there we go. So now I've got my user guess. So now I can say, well, okay, if the user guess is less than the target number, I can set my result label to low. And I probably also want to clear out that input field for the user by setting the text to the empty string. Otherwise, if my user guess is greater than the target number, tell them that it's too high. And again, clear out that input field. And otherwise, this means that the user guess is equal to the target number. It's the only option left. Right now, I'm just going to set the result label. We're going to come back in a minute and deal with the play again feature. But right now, I'll just tell the user that they've guessed it. Okay, so let's test this out. Need to make this a little wider now, even that I've added some more instructions. Hang on, let me do that. Probably a little wider still, but we'll get started. Okay, 50, too high. 25, too high. 12, too high. 10, too high. 1, too low. 5, too high. 3, too high. 2, you've got it. It was 2. Okay. So there we go. We want to now make sure this play again button is working. So where can we add in the code to enable play again? Well, we want to enable that button if the user has guessed the right number, right? So if they've guessed the number, play again dot set enabled to be true. Okay, so play again button. Now, one thing that I'm missing in this listener is that all of this action that I just wrote should only happen if this whole thing is being triggered by the user clicking enter, right? So actually what I need is one big conditional here to say if the event.getSource equals the input field, because this isn't what I want to happen if it's the play again button, right? That's a totally different set of actions that I want to take. So I want all of this to happen only if the user, if they're clicking that enter after entering in a number. But if on the other hand, if the event.getSource is the play again button, I want to do something different. So what do I want to do in that case? Well, first of all, if the user's got the number right and I've enabled the button and then they click that button, once they click it, I want to disable it again, right? Because I want to make them I want to force them to finish the current round that they're in. So now I'm going to again set that button to be not enabled, set the enabled to be false. And then what I want to do is I want to pick a new random number. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a little private method here, choose number. I'm going to put this code inside it because then I don't have to repeat the code twice. And I can just invoke choose number from the constructor. And I can invoke choose number after the user clicks the play again button. I can also reset the label text to be empty so that we don't have the you've got it left over from the last time. And I think that should be everything I need to do. Let's make this a little wider so we can again see still a little bit wider still. All right, so now let's try it. Okay, we'll start again with 50, too low, 75, too low, 80, 90, 85. We got it. So now I click play again, and you'll notice the result label disappears, it just because it has empty text. The play again button again gets grayed out, so it's disabled. Ooh, I forgot to reset that text there, so I want to do that as well. When the user clicks play again, I also want to clear out the input field by setting the text to the empty string. One last thing to do. But even without doing that, I can now make guesses again. 60. Okay, so there you go. There is a little high-low guessing game that we've written with GUIs. Now, the last slide of this series has to do with some troubleshooting checklists. So we're going to be building this checklist over a couple of videos. So this is a list in progress. We're going to be adding to it. But I put together this list because sometimes you can write a GUI program and forget to do something seemingly pretty small and your whole thing won't work, and it can be really challenging to track down what the problem is. So this is a list that you can keep track of, that when you really think everything is right, the program just isn't working, these are the things to go through and check. So one thing to check is to make sure you actually added your component, such as a button or a text field or whatever it was, onto the container, in our case the panel. So for example, if we go back to our number fun here, all of these labels, all of these buttons, I'm adding them all to the main panel. It's really kind of easy to forget that line and then not be able to figure out where is my button? Why isn't it showing up? I've created it, I don't see it. So make sure if something looks wrong, double check and make sure that you've added every component to a container. Okay. Then make sure you've actually added that panel to the frame. So that's part of the template code, but it's still kind of an easy thing to get lost. So here we have to add that main panel to the content pane. That's the only way we can see it. Remember that panels can't be seen on their own. They can only be seen if they're added to a frame. Did you register the listener to a button? So a very easy mistake to make is to write a button, add it to the panel, write your listener class, but forget to link them up like this, right? And so then you run your program and you're entering in numbers and you click the calculate button and nothing happens and you can't figure it out and it's very frustrating. So make sure that you have registered and linked up that component with the appropriate listener. Did you accidentally redeclare a component inside the constructor? This is a really common error that I see, and it is incredibly difficult to find if you've made it. So what I mean by that is we declared all of our components as instance data variables, and then we initialized them in the constructor. But what's an easy mistake to make is to accidentally redeclare it. So that would be like this, like putting the type in again. What this does is it actually creates a second button object that's just local to the constructor, but then when the constructor is done, that button object gets garbage collected and your original instance data variable is left as null. Okay, so that would look like this. If I then try to click my calculate button, nothing happens because I haven't created this as a button. I haven't, it's not the button that I think it is. It's not the one that I've registered to that listener. Okay, so the instance data variable button is left null, was never added to the panel. The one that I have added to the panel, and it's like I can't keep track of that later on, right? Because inside my listener here, I try to check to see if the source is the instance data variable version, not the local variable version, and it's not. So my listener is never going to get registered. Hopefully that makes sense why that's an error. But the bottom line is you almost never ever, I would say probably never, want to redeclare things inside the constructor. You only want to declare them as instance data variables and initialize them inside the constructor. So make sure that the only place you list the type is once. You can either list it as an instance data variable when you declare it there, or like we do for main panel, you can list the type and declare it inside the constructor. Sometimes you want to do something as instance data variable and sometimes you want to do it in the constructor, but you never want to do it twice. Okay, so that's the most important thing, is to make sure you only have the type declared in one single place. Okay, and in general, that one place is going to be as instance data variables. So then again, it's most important to make sure you don't redeclare as a local variable, because that is going to give you trouble that's going to be very hard to track down. So if something just seemingly, again, everything looks right, but like the button's not working, the text field's not working, it just doesn't seem to be working, check to make sure that you haven't accidentally redeclared things inside the constructor. And then the last little troubleshooting check is oftentimes if we are starting from an old program, we'll copy code, paste it into a new class, and then modify it. But a lot of times when people do that, they don't remember to go down to the main method and change the name of this class to be the new class that you're writing. And so that's going to give you an error. It's going to keep like running the old class and you might not be able to figure out why. So if you do kind of copy an old program, paste it into a new class, and then make modifications, make sure you also change the object that you're actually creating in main so that you're creating an object of that new class rather than the old class. So as I said, this is just an initial list. We're going to be building on this, so you'll have a longer list of kind of little troubleshooting checks to do if your program isn't quite working right and you can't quite figure out why. But this is a good list to start with, especially for the components we've talked about so far.